The mutual shock expressed by Bill Maher and Andrew Huberman when considering the actual extent of human medical NE science evolved into the surprising core of their lengthy conversation, greatly overshadowing the proximal, heated debate over mRNA vaccines. Maher, proceeding from his customary stance of skepticism toward institutional authority, had posited a provocative guess that humanity, despite its eons of collected wisdom and sophisticated technology, comprehends merely a fifth of the human body's total workings and disease pathways. However, Andrew Huberman, whose entire professional life is devoted to expanding that very frontier of knowledge, revised his figure downward with a grave estimate that was starker and more alarming. "I believe we are at 10. Huberman stated flatly, 10% at best. This one figure encapsulated their fundamental disagreement with the lot of people, the general public and possibly the overconfident cohort of medical professionals, who operate with a complacent, hazardous conviction that humanity has achieved 90% understanding, believing the chart is almost finished and only minor sections require filling in. This enormous chasm separating 10% from 90%, as outlined by Andrew Huberman, effectively governs the whole trajectory of medical guidelines, government financing, and the fundamental morality of patient care. When you operate from the belief that you are at 90%, scientific inquiry becomes merely progressive, extreme prudence becomes the dominant mode, and revolutionary new platforms like mRNA are regarded with distrust as potential disturbances to a nearly flawless paradigm. Conversely, if you embrace the stark truth advanced by Andrew Huberman, that we are navigating blindly, holding just a thin, wavering candle of comprehension that lights up barely a tenth of the vast, dark expanse, then the cancellation of $500 million in research funding, irrespective of the political fallout or valid anxieties about the COVID-19 rollout, shifts from a simple administrative blunder into an act of profound, historical irresponsibility. Andrew Huberman hastened to explain that this stark evaluation of our collective knowledge was not designed to undercut the vital confidence placed in his colleagues and friends who are doctors and researchers. Huberman himself stays profoundly dedicated to the scientific method, to specific pharmaceuticals, to correct diet, and to mental wellness, holding a strong conviction that these components are all indispensable. His professorship at Stanford stands as evidence of his dedication to the field. Yet that dedication is moderated by a profound, modest scientific viewpoint that almost no one with a public platform is willing to articulate. To hammer this idea home, Andrew Huberman offered a personal story that exposed the fundamental instability of our medical understanding, an instability far more threatening than any single new technology. He retold a discussion with a close associate, the head of neurosurgery, a person Andrew Huberman esteems as possibly one of the most skilled neurosurgeons living. Andrew Huberman put an astonishing query to this expert. What portion of the material in medical school curricula in the US and globally is flawed? Is simply untrue, and we are aware of it? The reply, given instantly, was a staggering blow to the perceived reliability of medical training, at least 50%. Half of the core text used to train new doctors is, as per the expert quoted by Andrew Huberman, known to be flawed, made irrelevant, or entirely wrong by the ceaseless, swift surge of new information. Bill Maher, taking in this disclosure, felt his own deep-seated doubt justified, even as the consequence of it was deeply unsettling. The discussion then plunged directly into the ramifications of this shocking rate of knowledge obsolescence. When Huberman's associate, the neurosurgery chair, was pressed further on the ramifications of this astonishing degree of known error, half of all core knowledge being incorrect, for human well-being and disease management, the neurosurgeon's answer was blunt and profound. The ramifications are incalculable. Andrew Huberman emphasized the resulting conclusion. We remain in the nascent stages of our comprehension. This scientific admission, while it might have validated Maher's anti-authoritarian leanings, compels a complete re-evaluation of every public health decree, every accepted standard of treatment, and every choice to halt funding for promising studies. If 50% of what is instructed in medical school is fundamentally flawed, how can we possibly justify scrapping a potent technological avenue like mRNA, which may hold the very solution for transformative therapies for severe apolitical afflictions such as cancers, neurological disorders, and inherited genetic conditions? Andrew Huberman took pains not to condemn the whole of the scientific establishment. He was clear in conveying to Bill Maher that this infancy of understanding does not invalidate the reality that humanity has, in fact, made great discoveries, nor does it imply that the National Institutes of Health, NIH, is a failed endeavor. Quite the opposite. Andrew Huberman admitted that the NIH has yielded beautiful returns across numerous domains of science and medicine. But the stunning revelation of our 10% comprehension and the 50% inaccuracy of textbooks demands an immediate action. Huberman maintained that the urgent requirement is for an audit and a revision of our existing methods, a careful audit and revision. He stressed, this course correction is not a cynical act of demolition but a vital measure to align public confidence with the genuine humility of the scientific process. The final consensus reached by Bill Maher and Andrew Huberman goes beyond simple politics or public health directives. It stands as a call to action for intellectual integrity. After establishing the startling truth of how little we comprehend, and how much of what we presume to know is probably wrong, the act of scrapping a technology merely due to its political associations becomes inexcusable. The debate surrounding mRNA vaccines, fueled by the intense and perhaps even traumatic rollout during the pandemic, where Andrew Huberman conceded the genuine suffering of individuals who insist on or have evidence that they have vaccine injuries of some sort, must not be permitted to determine the destiny of completely distinct, life-saving science. To forsake the investigation of mRNA's enormous potential for cancer and genetic disorders, Huberman finished, would be the pinnacle of irrationality. Bill Maher, the veteran iconoclast, had to concur, lending his tacit support to Huberman's closing, crucial plea. We must not just throw things out because of what they're called. The label mRNA now carries political toxicity. But the molecule itself contains the operating system for life, and in a reality where we grasp only 10% of the rulebook, discarding a valuable player due to its associations is an indulgence humanity cannot permit. The true controversy, it turns out, is not the technology, but the dangerous certitude of the ignorant masses pitted against the vital, humble quest for the desperately needed 90%. Andrew Huberman and Bill Maher discovered a shared understanding in the most shocking statistic from their entire discussion: the stark admission that humanity is only on the verge of comprehension, holding maybe just 10% of the intricate knowledge governing life and illness. This mutual, profound scientific humility, however, compels an essential and challenging confrontation with the established medical frameworks. Andrew Huberman, having just quoted the neurosurgery chair's estimate that 50% of standard medical school textbook material is already understood to be incorrect or wholly false, directed his focus to the institutional reaction, a point essential for framing Bill Maher's overarching skepticism. This dramatic speed of knowledge replacement, where core information is rendered obsolete almost overnight, led to the stark declaration that its effect on human health and the success of disease treatment is simply incalculable. The entire conversation, Huberman asserted, highlights the reality that we are still in our infancy of understanding, a statement that ought to deeply influence every governmental budget debate and every strategy for pharmaceutical development from now on. Nevertheless, Andrew Huberman was cautious to offset this criticism of medical assuredness with a simultaneous defense of the scientific method. He ensured Bill Maher and the listeners knew this critique of the knowledge repository was not intended as an outright dismissal of the institutions that have productively propelled progress. Andrew Huberman specifically affirmed that this acknowledgement of our infancy does not equate to that the NIH is a failed endeavor, adding swiftly that the National Institutes of Health has, over time, returned beautifully in many areas of science and medicine. The issue, as Huberman framed it, isn't the quest for knowledge, but the hubris that presumes the quest is almost over. This dual acknowledgement of both scientific vulnerability and institutional achievement permitted Huberman to shift to his primary recommendation for the future, a suggestion that Bill Maher, the examiner of public absurdity, could easily endorse. The necessary step, in Andrew Huberman's view, is not a complete revolution, but an immediate, methodical audit and a revision of existing medical procedures and educational content, a careful audit and revision. He reiterated, if half of the core material used to educate doctors is flawed, then the moral imperative to examine and modernize that knowledge base becomes supreme. Superseding all political disputes, this essential corrective action brings the entire conversation back to its origin. Returning to the significant, real-world dispute over the $500 million reduction in mRNA research. Bill Maher, who initiated this part of the talk by voicing his agitation at the defunding of a technology he wishes to see advanced, discovered in Huberman's scientific analysis the ultimate validation for his position. The dispute, therefore, isn't about the technology's efficacy. Huberman noted mRNA's potential in non-COVID applications like cancers, neurological conditions, and genetic illnesses, but about whether public apprehension, inflamed by the chaotic implementation during the pandemic, should be permitted to control foundational scientific strategy. Andrew Huberman's conclusive, potent summary acted as the definitive intellectual gauntlet thrown down to the public and the policymakers who capitulated to public emotion by slashing research funding. Given that we function with a mere 10% of total understanding, and given that our core textbooks are 50% incorrect, it is irrational, contrary to science, and completely counterproductive to deliberately remove a powerful new instrument from our sparse toolkit. Andrew Huberman acknowledged that there are individuals who genuinely feel they have sustained vaccine-related harm and that this feeling is the rationale for removing this $500 million of support. Yet he contended, with absolute certainty, that humanity would be absolutely foolish to ignore the technology, irrespective of the emotional atmosphere. The name mRNA was contaminated by its linkage to political and social division. But Andrew Huberman vigorously reminded Bill Maher and all listeners that the underlying molecular technology is integral to life itself and possesses the capability to resolve issues far removed from the public health conflicts. The greatest tragedy, Huberman concluded, the true scientific default in the face of our vast medical ignorance, is the reflexive action to just throw things out because of what they're called. Bill Maher, having absorbed the persuasive, detailed argument that flawlessly combined skepticism with scientific advocacy, could only affirm the vital need to press forward, acknowledging that in the quest for the outstanding 90%, every feasible scientific avenue must be kept open, no matter the political fallout. Thomas stared at her, the studio lights glinting off his glasses. He let out a low, humorless chuckle. Predictability as the ultimate luxury. Molly, that is the most terrifyingly honest and profoundly decadent slogan for the end of a civilization one have ever heard. You've just conceded my entire point. You've just admitted that the messy human smell I'm talking about, the friction, the fallibility, that's not just something you're afraid of, it's something you are now. As a political and cultural project, actively engineering out of existence because it's inconvenient, you are defending a generation that is demanding, what? A safe space from reality? A predictable algorithm for life? You say, luxury, but what I hear is a profound, infantile demand for a world without consequence, without risk, and ultimately, without meaning. He sat up, his voice taking on the sharp edge of a prosecutor. This isn't just about dating apps. This is the entire ballgame. This is the core of the Mandema problem. You think Obama is afraid of the slogan, capitalism is theft? No, he's afraid of the voters who hear that slogan and believe it. Because what are they actually demanding? Are they demanding better management? Are they demanding, as you say, a functioning safety net? Some are, but the core of that movement, the part that terrifies the institutionalists like Obama and Cuomo, is demanding a fantasy. They are demanding a world that recalculates itself to be fair. Just like the robots, they are the 79% of Gen Z with dating app burnout. But they've applied it to the entire economic system. They've hit a little bit of difficulty, and yes, I know it's more than a little, and their response is not to build, not to grow, not to manage, but to swipe left on the entire system and demand a sterile replacement, where the outcomes are guaranteed. You're not describing a populace that's been made vulnerable. Molly, he pressed on, his voice dripping with condescension. You're describing a populace that has been infantilized. You're arguing that people are no longer capable of handling the fundamental friction of being human. So the system, that great, abstract boogeyman, must be re-engineered to become a national-scale AI girlfriend. A perfectly calibrated nanny state that anticipates our needs, validates our feelings, and, most importantly, never, ever allows us to fail, be hurt, or be messy. You talk about the digital drowning as a media problem. No, the digital drowning is a cultural problem. We are drowning in our own demand for a life without edges. And the Democratic Party, afraid of its own shadow, is validating this delusion instead of leading people out of it. They're afraid to go on Joe Rogan not because they'll get clipped, though you're right. They will, but because they have no answer to the 80 million people who are still willing to live in the real, messy, high-friction world and are looking for a leader, not a moderator. Molly looked at him, her expression not angry, but profoundly weary, as if she were explaining gravity to a child for the 1000th time. Thomas, you are so blinded by your romantic, nostalgic vision of friction that you cannot see the nature of the modern battlefield. You talk about infantilization as if it's a choice. You call it a demand. You're ignoring the cost. You talk about risk and consequence as if they are noble character-building exercises. But the consequences have been ratcheted up to an existential level. That's the part you refuse to see. The system I'm talking about isn't an abstract boogeyman, it is a very real, very tangible, and total architecture of surveillance and punishment. You champion meeting someone drunk in a bar, she asked, her voice tight with disbelief. In 2024, when that messy interaction can be filmed on a phone, posted without context, and permanently attached to your digital identity? When a human, fallible mistake, a clumsy romantic failure, can be screenshotted, shared, and reviewed by your future employer? The friction you love is no longer ephemeral. It is permanent. It is archived. We are living in a panopticon. And you're wondering why people are retreating to sterile, encrypted, and deletable virtual spaces? It's not a fear of friction, Thomas. It's a rational, calculated terror of the permanent record. And you apply this same willful blindness to politics. She continued, her momentum building. You mock the Democrats for being afraid of an 8-second clip. You have no idea what you're talking about. It's not one clip. It's that the entire electorate is now an armed and active opposition research team. Every voter you meet has a high-definition camera and a global distribution platform in their pocket. The digital drowning I described isn't a risk, it's a certainty. The moment you step onto that stage, the moment you go on Rogan or the Milk Boys, you are not having a conversation. You are generating raw data for the algorithm to dismember. The other side is playing by different rules. Because they thrive in that noise. They want the chaos. They want the system to be all friction and no substance. Because it's the only environment where their brand of nihilistic, anti-management politics can survive. So yes, politicians retreat to focus group language. They sound like robots. They sound sterile. Because in a world where one fallible human phrase can be algorithmically weaponized to destroy your entire career and misrepresent your entire platform, sterile is the only strategy that allows you to survive long enough to even try to govern. You're demanding that they be messy and human in an arena that is explicitly designed to execute them for it. That is not leadership, that is suicide. And this, she said, her voice dropping, is why Obama is intervening. He sees this. He knows the messy human rage that Mandema represents as pure, uncut, clip fuel. Mandema is a walking, talking, 8-second disaster for every moderate Democrat in the country. Obama isn't putting his thumb on the scale to protect the center. He's trying to stop his own party from handing the opposition a nuclear-tipped missile. He's not afraid of the ideology, he's afraid of the in-camera stupidity of it all. Thomas shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face. So that's it. We're done. We surrender. The human experiment is over because the camera is too scary. The algorithm is too mean. We must all become perfectly calibrated. That's the word you used for the AI. We must all become perfectly calibrated robots because we are terrified of the panopticon. Molly, that is the most cowardly, pathetic excuse for a political philosophy I have ever heard. You have just argued, with a straight face, that authenticity is a strategic liability. And you wonder why people are disgusted? You wonder why they turned to Mandema, or Trump, or Rogan. It's because, for all their catastrophic, civilization-ending flaws, they are the only ones left who sound human. They are the only ones willing to be messy. The voters don't smell fear from the Democrats. As I said before, they smell the antiseptic, sterile, inhuman reek of calculation. You've proven my point, he said, sitting back. You are the robots you're defending. Your entire worldview is a recalculation. You are recalculating relationships to avoid the cost of the permanent record. You are recalculating politics to avoid the cost of a bad news cycle. You're so terrified of the cost of being human that you've opted for a managed, sterile, virtual existence, and you are demanding that our entire society follow suit. You want to moderate the real world. You want to filter the economy. You want to apply your systemic analysis until every last drop of messy human smell, every last pheromone, has been filtered out to create a predictable, equitable, and utterly dead society. This is the true link between the AI girlfriend and Mandami's socialism. They are the same impulse. They are both a rejection of human fallibility. You cannot stand that the world is messy, that people make bad choices, that failure exists. Mandami's slogan isn't just an economic statement, it's a cultural one. Capitalism is theft, is the ultimate recalculation. It reframes all human failure, every bad business decision, every lack of talent, every poor choice, as a systemic crime. It eliminates personal responsibility entirely. It's an algorithm for justice that, like the AI girlfriend, promises a perfectly predictable, frictionless experience, and it is a lie. It's a lie that feels good, but it's one that management cannot solve. You can't manage a fantasy. You can't run the infrastructure for a population that believes friction itself is an injustice. That is the path to total collapse. You're not just failing to break through, you are actively advocating for the end of reality. Molly's jaw was tight. She leaned in so far her face was inches from his. The microphone between them the only barrier. You love that word, fallibility. You throw it around like a talisman. You love the idea of it. You love it in sports, Nadal's human quest for excellence. You love it in your nostalgic fantasy of a drunken bar meeting. You claim to be the champion of the messy and the real. But you are a hypocrite, Thomas, a total, utter hypocrite. Because the moment that human fallibility stops being a romantic, masculine adventure and becomes a biological reality for a woman, you and your competent managers are the first in line to punish it. What, she said, her voice dangerously quiet, is more messy, more human, more fallible than an accidental, unwanted pregnancy? What is more messy and biologically real than the frankly gross uterine conditions I mentioned? That is the epitome of the human fallibility you claim to cherish. And what is the system you so staunchly defend doing? It is weaponizing that fallibility. It is making it prohibitively expensive. It is shaming it. It is passing laws to criminalize it. It is turning the acquisition of basic, necessary health care, methylpristone at a Costco, into an undignified, embarrassing transaction. You don't love human fallibility, Thomas, she whispered, her voice shaking with a cold fury. You love your fallibility. You love the fallibility that comes with power. The kind that gets written off as a character-building experience. You want a world where you get to be messy and drunk in a bar. But the 23-year-old girl who has to deal with the messy consequences of that night must be a perfectly calculating robot just to survive. You've got it all backwards. We are not choosing the virtual because we're infantilized robots. We are being hunted into the virtual. We are being driven there by a real world managed by your competent but soulless, calculating system. That has made actual human fallibility a financial and legal death sentence for anyone who isn't you. The AI girlfriend isn't the problem. It's the only sanctuary left in a society that has no more margin for error, no more grace, and no more compassion for the messy biological realities of being human. You're not defending competence. You're defending a prison.